This episode of Midco Sports Magazine is presented by Shields and Sanford Orthopedics and Sports Medicine.
Welcome to Midco Sports Magazine. Well, more than 90 countries around the world get together this month in South Korea for the Winter Olympic Games. Thousands of athletes and thousands of stories, and we've got a few of our own that bring the games home. Like a man from Minnesota, he's a college coach in Duluth and former Olympic hopeful who has become world famous for his excitement as an Olympic announcer. And an event that makes humans fly, how North and South Dakota actually had a hand in the early evolution of ski jumping in the United States. But we start with a love story about a luger. It's a wonderful tale about how a couple got together. A young woman who won an Olympic medal 4 years ago, and why a young man and his entire community of Barnesville, Minnesota will be cheering her on this year. Here's Jody Norstead.
Here we go, work together, work together.
Your childhood is where your story begins.
Good job, Carter.
After all, it's where the energy, the memories, the dreams, and many times the friendships are first cultivated.
Let's go, good job.
Thankfully for these kids, they're learning from a man that knows just how valuable these younger years can be.
Being able to interact with kids and being able to share something positive with them daily and teach them how to live a better and healthier life is it's a passion of mine.
Today, like most days, will be a balance of chaos and connecting for John. He teaches 13 classes of elementary students, each one seemingly requiring more energy than the last. And then he has his coaching duties for the varsity basketball game at night. But smack dab in the middle,
Here we go.
Is a trip to the airport to pick up his fiancée, Erin.
It's become our normal. It's been the bulk of our relationship.
And the waiting.
This part's the worst. the anticipation building up, man.
Is normal too. John Hodges' childhood may sound familiar to anyone who grew up in a family that has divorced parents. At 8 years old, while living in central New York, his parents separated, and John moved here to Barnesville, Minnesota, with his mother and sister, Jenny. But during the summers, he'd return to New York to live with his dad, which meant tagging along on work trips, and eventually meeting the girl that would someday capture his heart.
My dad actually is an electrician and wired her parents' house. So we'd hang with the Hamlins. We'd play with those guys. It was nonstop. Like, all right, over here, boom, sandbox, whatever, swing set, whatever was there, we did. They beautiful woods, ran in the woods, did whatever there was to do out there, explored.
But those few weeks were it. Once the wiring was done, so was the spark of electricity forged in their 2-week-long friendship. For the next 20 years, they barely gave each other a thought. In the meantime, Erin was becoming head behind heels in love with the sport of luge.
Obviously a huge adrenaline rush. You're going up to 90 miles an hour sometimes, and you're a couple inches off the ice.
Her first taste came as a 12-year-old. 8 years later, she qualified for the U.S. Olympic team and took 12th place in Torino in 2006. 4 years after that, she captured 16th place in Vancouver's Winter Games, before finally making history by winning bronze in Sochi in 2014, becoming the first American to medal in the event.
I grew up watching the Olympics. I idolized Olympic athletes, and I loved hearing the stories and all the work that they went through, and to be up there and think, wow, I'm getting that moment. There are not many athletes that get that moment in the grand scheme of things, so being able to get that was pretty cool.
Meanwhile, an elementary Phi Ed class back in Barnesville was belting out cheers for a person they'd never met.
We did an Olympic week at school, and I told all the kids about it, and they didn't believe me. They're like, yeah, right, Mr. Hodge, you don't know an Olympian.
If John was being honest, it was more like he knew of an Olympian. But that was about to change. A few months after watching Hamlin's heroics in Vancouver, John found himself back in central New York to attend his cousin's graduation, and in an instant, a blast from the past came sledding right into his heart.
I look onto the stage, and my cousin was going to give salutatorian speech. I look over a little bit more and I go, Jenny, Erin Hamlin's on stage right now. She goes, wow, that's her, isn't it? And I told my cousin who had graduated, I said, I gotta run into Erin today sometime. And he's like, well, we invited him to the graduation party. I
remember thinking, oh, that's really weird. Like, I didn't have any idea that he was related to that family. Got like introduced to him again. It was funny. I think he was gonna shake my hand, but I'm a hugger, so I like went to hug him. So I think I made the first move. I don't know.
we hung out. We ended up hanging out. And went on a date, I guess, and it went really well. I told her, I was like, you know, I don't think I'm ready to head back to Minnesota. I think I want to kind of see what's here. And she was kind of feeling the same way.
It shouldn't come as a surprise that the two fell in love so quickly. After all, it seems to be the only speed Erin knows.
There were a lot of moments where I was like, okay, is this real? Like, is this actually, I don't know, like, is this real life? Like, is this not someone playing a prank on me or something? I don't know. But yeah, it was just easy and comfortable and yeah.
But there have also been twists and turns. Erin's training schedule takes her all over the world, meaning a long-distance relationship is all they've known for the past 3.5 years.
It's never easy. It's always kind of a, you know, it's always a bummer when you have to be gone.
It gets tough. You know, there's days where, you know, I'd much rather be hanging out with her than doing what I'm doing, but, you know, the perspective's always been there. That, you know, this is what I want, and willing to do whatever I need to do to make this work.
In a way, not much has changed from their brief childhood relationship. The two will hang out this summer in that same backyard when they exchange wedding vows. And this month, they'll be on another outdoor adventure as Erin makes her final luge at the Olympics in Pyeongchang.
I just want her to go there and have fun. I want her to go there and enjoy the moment as much as she can be in the last Olympics she's going to participate in. To see her on that stage is going to be a special moment.
And joined by Jody in West Fargo now, and I love this story. It is so good. But you talk about the first time they met, and then 20 years go by until they meet the second time. But the second encounter almost didn't happen, is that right?
Yeah, John told me there was a time when he and his sister thought about not going to his cousin's graduation, but obviously they ended up going. And for Erin, she was still trying to, remember, settle back into a little bit of normalcy after the Olympics and just kind of wanted to lay low that night, not go to the graduation party after speaking at the graduation. But at the last minute, she told her parents as they were walking out the door to wait for her to change clothes so she could come with, and of course, the rest is history.
That is such a great story. All right, and the story of how you found out about this story is also a pretty good story.
Well, John has actually been featured in our trick shot segment on Midco Sports Tonight. In fact, he's had shots so good that he's made America's Funniest Home Videos, full court shots, no look between his legs. Anyways, long story short, he shared a previous Midco Magazine story on Facebook with Erin, and our producer Josh Muntz recognized Erin's name from the Olympics, and he asked how the two knew each other, and when we heard their love story, we knew we had to share it. It's pretty good.
That is so good. All right, thanks a lot. Jody Norstead.
Midco Sports Magazine on Midco Sports Network is presented by Shields and Sanford Orthopedics and Sports Medicine.
Welcome back to Midco Sports Magazine. Well, for a lot of people, the most famous TV moment in Olympic history is Al Michaels in 1980 with his "Do You Believe in Miracles" call for the men's hockey team. Well, in Olympic cross-country skiing, that Michaels moment belongs to a man from our little part of the world. Here's Brian Shawn.
Growing up on the Iron Range in northern Minnesota, you could say Chad Salma was born to ski, putting on his first pair when he was just a year old. But early on in life, he wasn't all that motivated by it.
Kind of got into ski racing pretty begrudgingly. My brother wanted to do it. It turned out that I had a little more engine.
Without doing much training, he entered his first major race when he was just 12 years old, an 18-mile grind cross-country.
I got to the finish line, I think I was 5th in my age group, and I saw the kid who won my age group got a trophy about this big for winning. I said, that's it, I'm going to win it next year. And I started training. I won that trophy the next year in my age group at the Moorboss Lopet, and that's kind of where it all started.
He started skiing every day with a new Nordic center just 20 miles up the road from his home.
You'll tend to like anything you're good at. So I was pretty good at ski racing and found my way into biathlon at 18.
Chad fared well as a junior competitor, and many in the sport took notice. But there were setbacks.
I actually struggled for 3 years. They kept putting me on the team because they believed that I would develop into a world-class athlete, and really what it turned out to probably be, looking back now as a coach, is I was probably overtrained.
Salma almost quit competing in 1997, turning down a spot in the world-class athlete program. Instead, at age 26, he decided to train overseas in Sweden, hoping to make another run at the Olympic team in 1998. But in the U.S. trials, more disappointment.
I made a couple of mistakes that really were costly, and one of them was I chose a pair of skis on the last day that, while it was raining, and they just slowed down. They picked up all kinds of dirt, and I probably was in position to make the team in '98, and I just didn't. And that was a pretty hard one to swallow after you'd already been kind of quitting in '97. I think every kid who dreams about being an Olympian and comes close, or even maybe thinks they should have gone and didn't, would probably feel the same way, that there's something special about the Olympics.
Salma immediately jumped into coaching for the U.S. team and then decided to take on the difficult task of organizing the Nordic ski and biathlon events for the 2002 Olympic Games in Salt Lake City, Utah.
The amount of energy that has to go into putting on Olympics is daunting. I took the job at 30 years old, 29 years old. It was just pretty young. But you think you can do anything when you're 29.
During the final day of the Salt Lake Games, the public address announcer for the ski events was called away for the closing ceremonies, leaving an opening. And Salma found a different calling that he didn't expect.
So I got to do the final day, the women's 30K in cross country as well. And that guy was an independent contractor, producer director out of New York City named Ken Gordis, and he heard me through the PA system and said, we should get this guy in this sport on American TV.
Soon after that, Salma was added to the announcing team for biathlon and other ski events on the Outdoor Life Network with veteran Bob Papa, honing his skills as a broadcaster under the eye of Gordis.
He liked my enthusiasm, he liked my attention to detail, and my ability to boil down in real time what's happening in a sport that most Americans would never understand unless you had somebody doing that, and that's why he thought we had an opportunity. So he put together a highlight reel for NBC and sent it to them before the Torino Games.
Salma just started coaching cross-country skiing at St. Scholastica in Duluth, Minnesota, when he was hired by NBC to broadcast events for the Torino Games in 2006.
Look at people who do a great job with color commentary. They're people who understand the intimate details of the sport, have at least participated at that level as a coach and or an athlete, and can very quickly have a very short fuse from their thoughts to their words and in analyzing what's actually happening in real time. And I can do that. Why I can do that, I have no idea.
Salma has been on the call for NBC ever since, with his role expanding along the way.
So they hired me to do everything in Vancouver. I did Nordic Combined cross country, the cross country piece of Nordic Combined, all the cross country races, all the biathlon races, and it was something like 26 events in 16 days. It was exhausting.
The Sochi Games were the third for Salma as a broadcaster, but it was his call during the men's skiathlon that thrust him into the national spotlight.
And I knew that something dramatic was going to happen.
These are your 4 guys for medals right here.
And it did.
Here comes Colonia. Dario Colonia is back, and he's going for the gold in the skiathlon.
I think they all played their cards to the Olympic rings, and they still had 300 meters to go to the finish.
Colonia's got to make it decisive because it's a downhill from right at the top of this hill.
Some of them were barely standing on their skis, and to me that was just gripping.
Colonia gets the gap. Look at the gap.
It was like a prize fight.
They're all running on fumes.
6 guys in a ring beating each other up.
There is nothing left in anybody. Nothing left.
His excitement for the moment got attention immediately.
The producer down in Sochi, I go, hey, what's up? What's happening, guys? And they're like, you're what's happening. He goes, you're all over social media for yesterday's call. You know, like, yeah, whatever. He goes, no, really.
The response from viewers was overwhelming.
Al even said to me at some point, he goes, yeah, it's a crazy world. 20 years ago, they would have fired you for that call, and now they love you.
Even with all his notoriety behind the microphone, his passion is still coaching as he continues to work with young athletes.
When push comes to shove, if I think about what I'm most proud of, some of the athletic performances that I've helped elicit from athletes as their coach, there's probably a long list of those above that call from Sochi.
Salma doesn't ski that much anymore, just from time to time for short periods, so he can enjoy a sport he's been involved with for over 4 decades.
Something nice about your breath freezing in front of you. The smell of cold winter. There's something inherently enjoyable about it, especially once you've mastered the difficulty of the sport.
All right, welcome now by Brian Sean in Fargo. And B, he talked in the story about 20 years ago, if he got that excited, people might have not been as excited as he was, the executives and things like that in TV. But people kind of want that nowadays, don't they?
Yeah, I think people want to see the personalities, Tom. That's a really, it's a really good point. We talked about the excitement and how you see more broadcasters maybe breaking with the so quote-unquote rules. And that was really what really put him into this spotlight that he got in as a broadcaster. And I think that's kind of a neat story for, a guy that really wasn't trained in this industry, yet here he is.
And another thing that's interesting about our industry, I guess, nowadays is you don't necessarily have to be on site to call the action. And that's going to be the case with him for these Olympics.
Yeah, he's actually not going to be going to South Korea. And this is the first time he's going to be calling an Olympics without being on site. He's going to a bunker with NBC out there in Connecticut, and will actually be calling races with the time change in the middle of the night. So he's going to have to train his body to sleep during the day for a lot of these 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. live event broadcasts back in the States. So that's going to certainly be different for him and a challenge over the course of a 3-week, Olympics.
All right, interesting. Great stuff. Thanks a lot, Brian Sean. Well, still to come, the story of how the Olympic sport of ski jumping is tied to the Dakotas. But first, this month's Science of Sports segment, featuring Pierce, South Dakota native Sam Willard.
Sports science is really understanding the physiology and the biomechanics behind athletic performance and health and safety. Sam performed the cross-lane agility drill, which is a really good test of basketball-specific agility, and also tells us a little bit about how well a basketball player can cover ground quickly. If you have a combination of great athleticism in terms of speed and quickness and agility, as well as good size and good length, that really goes into making a good basketball player.
Midco Sports Magazine on Midco Sports Network is presented by Shields and Sanford Orthopedics and Sports Medicine.
Well, ski jumping is one of the most spectacular events in the Winter Games, and it was a sport that was born in Norway, but more than 80 years ago it got a huge boost in the United States in 2 small towns in the Dakotas, where one of the original super slides ever built in this country still stands, sort of.
People still talk about it because part of it still stands.
Just outside the town of Devil's Lake, North Dakota, you can still see the rusty remnants of a structure that marks a brief moment in American history, when the Dakotas and Minnesota had very tight ties to the Olympic sport of ski jumping. The event was conceived and born in Norway in the late 1800s and brought to the United States by Scandinavian settlers. In Devil's Lake, this skeleton is all that remains of the scaffolding that originally topped out at 118 feet in the air. Another piece of it blew down last winter, and every year there is less and less of this historic marker. It harkens back to a short period when large crowds would gather here to watch professionals from North Dakota, like Casper Oyman and Peter Falstead, soar almost 200 feet from start to finish, Olympic distance at the time. While much of the rest of the country was dealing with the stock market crash of 1929 and the dirty 30s that followed, the town of Devil's Lake was actually young and growing. People had leisure time and they were looking for fun and for things to do. They had baseball and boating and swimming in the summer.
And in the winter, of course, because we live where there's snow, so they have time, and they have more time as well. They had a winter sports club in the 30s, then decided to build this ski lift.
From 1933 to 1937, the Lake Region Winter Sports Club held tournaments that included ski jumping. And
in 1936, they used the ski jump by Devil's Lake for the Olympic trials.
Well, 4 years before that, the Olympic trials were held in South Dakota, on the banks of the Big Sioux River just outside the town of Canton. Like Devil's Lake, Canton was taking advantage of the short-lived national fascination with ski jumping.
That industry and that particular sport was just getting ramped up and started in the world back then.
The Canton jump itself has been gone for more than 70 years now, but in the early 1930s, this was known as America's finest hill. The Sioux Valley Ski Club hosted national tournaments and attracted huge crowds.
It added a tremendous financial boost, having thousands of people. Every hotel was filled. Passenger train would be taking people 2 miles each to go, and all the extra food vendors and everything that goes with having crowds of up to 35,000. It was a huge financial boon for the town.
The boon would soon go bust as America moved on to other pursuits. But the influx and the influence of our German and Norwegian ancestors had certainly made its mark and formed a brief bond between the upper Midwest and Olympic ski jumping glory. And to be historically fair about the history of the sport in the United States, you cannot overlook one other small town in our part of the world. Red Wing, Minnesota hosted the very first competition in the States and is home to the American Ski Jumping Hall of Fame. The Red Wing style was the original technique that was copied across the continent and evolved nearly 100 years later into the Flying V used by the best in the world today. The current ski jumping record is an astonishing 832 feet from takeoff to landing. The modern event is sleek and colorful and beautiful to behold, and it owes a lot to the pioneers on the prairie who got it all going downhill decades ago. Thanks for watching. You can find this episode and all episodes of Midco Sports Magazine on YouTube.
This has been Midco Sports Magazine, presented by Shields and Sanford Orthopedics and Sports Medicine.